They called her suspicious because she wore a hoodie, because she was tired, because she was black. Marsha Dean had spent her life healing others, but one night at a small-town pharmacy, she became the one no one wanted to help. They didn't ask questions. They didn't read her file. They just called the cops. But what they didn't know was that behind the hoodie, behind the silence, stood a woman who knew exactly who she was, and a husband who would remind the whole town exactly who they were dealing with. This is not just a story about race. It's a story about dignity, about what happens when you mess with someone who's been quiet too long. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. She didn't want to be seen that night. Marsha Dean wasn't hiding, not in the way people thought, but some nights. After 13 hours in a trauma unit, survival meant shrinking. It meant walking soft, keeping your head down, just making it home. She wore the same gray hoodie she always did on night shifts, loose, with the drawstrings pulled low, comfy old sneakers, her scrubs still underneath. She moved like a woman carrying the weight of 100 lives, and maybe she was. When you've spent 3 decades nursing strangers through gunshots, heart attacks, and cancer, some of that pain starts living in your bones. But Marsha didn't complain. She never did. That's what made her invisible in places like Ashville. Asheville, South Carolina, the kind of town where flags fly year-round and folks smile with clenched jaws, where people wave at church, then lock their doors when the wrong kind of car pulls up. Marsha knew the rhythm, knew when to look away, knew how to move through the world like mist. She had lived in that town longer than most, bought her little house before Starbucks ever touched the county, but still to some, she was just that black lady with the medical badge. No husband around, no kids at the high school, just quiet. That night, she pulled into the Ridgeway Pharmacy around 9:43 p.m. One light above the lot flickered like a tired heartbeat. Marsha grabbed her small purse, slipped her phone in her pocket, and walked in. No drama, just a refill. Her blood pressure had been spiking again, and she wasn't about to let that slide. Not with her family history, not after all she'd seen on the job. Inside, the place was nearly empty. One teenage clerk at the counter chewing gum, scrolling his phone like it was oxygen. A single customer in the greeting card aisle, and a tight-faced woman in a red vest standing behind the register, arms folded like someone guarding a vault. Marsha didn't flinch. She dealt with worse in ER waiting rooms. She offered a soft smile, slid her ID and insurance card across the counter, and handed over the slip from her doctor. Routine stuff. She'd picked up the same meds from the same place every 30 days for nearly 5 years. The boy barely glanced at her. He punched in the info, squinted, tapped again, his brow furrowed. Then he leaned toward the manager. Whispers, a glance at Marsha, then another. That's when the air changed. It wasn't loud. No alarms, but Marsha felt it. That heavy, quiet tension, the shift in body language, the glance that lingers 1 second too long, the way someone stands just a little straighter when they're not sure whether to call the police or the manager. Every black person knows that shift. Marsha knew it before a single word left the woman's mouth. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the manager finally said, her smile too sweet, too stretched. "But there's an issue with your prescription." Marsha tilted her head. Calm, measured. "I've picked this up every month. Same doctor, same everything." The manager fidgeted. "It's showing a mismatch on the account. I'm afraid we can't fill this tonight." Marsha didn't raise her voice. She never did. "Check again." The manager's lips pressed tight. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here. We've contacted the authorities to sort it out." For a second, just a second, Marsha thought she'd misheard. "The authorities," she repeated, quiet, flat. No one answered. The clerk looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The manager took a step back, defensive now. Like Marsha had done something wrong just by standing there. Like that hoodie and that skin said more than any ID ever could. Outside, the low hum of sirens began to crawl into earshot. Marsha could have left. She could have asked for her documents and walked straight out the door, but she didn't, because leaving would look like guilt, and she wasn't guilty. She had nothing to prove, but she had everything to protect. She stood still, back straight, hands at her side, breathing steady, and waited for whatever came through those doors next. The chime above the pharmacy door rang out, sharp, sharp enough that every head in the building turned. Including Marsha's. Two police officers stepped through, both white, both walking like they owned the oxygen in the room. Kyle Jefferson came first, chest puffed, steps heavy. He had that face, the kind that looked like it had been carved from a block of anger, a man who measured respect in decibels and obedience. Behind him was Lucas Grant, younger, slighter, the kind of man who had not yet decided if he liked the power stitched into his uniform. Kyle spotted Marsha in an instant. He did not look at the counter. He did not look at the register. He did not even glance at the screen where the supposed error blinked in neon letters. He looked at her hoodie. He looked at her skin, and that was enough. The manager rushed forward, all urgency now, voice pitched like she had just found a ticking bomb. "That is her," she hissed, pointing as if summoning a curse. "She tried to commit fraud, different account numbers. I think she stole someone else's insurance. No proof, no hesitation." Marsha stood still. Her pulse pounded, but her hands remained loose at her sides. Kyle approached her like a wolf approaches a rabbit. "Ma'am," he barked. His tone curled around the word like it burned his tongue. "I am going to need you to step outside." Marsha lifted her chin. "No fear, no fight. I have not done anything wrong," she said, each word clipped, precise, measured. Lucas hovered behind his partner, hands twitching, mouth opening, then closing again. He knew something was off, knew it the way a deer knows when the forest goes too quiet, but he said nothing. Kyle took another step closer. "We can do this the easy way," he said, his hand drifting to the cuffs at his belt. "Or we can do this the hard way, around them." The pharmacy froze. Mothers pulled their children closer. A man near the greeting cards pulled out his phone, pretending to text but angling the camera just so. Marsha noticed. She saw the story forming, the way it always formed. They would not see a nurse exhausted from saving lives. They would not see a woman trying to pick up blood pressure medication after a 14-hour shift. They would see a hoodie, a face, a frame that they had already decided was guilty. Marsha reached slowly into her purse. No sudden movements. Her fingers closed around her wallet, the leather warm from being pressed close to her body all day. She pulled out her ID, her insurance card, the prescription slip, everything in perfect order. She held them out. "I have everything you need right here," she said, her voice steady. Kyle did not even glance. "I said step outside." He barked louder, like raising his voice would make his authority real. When Marsha did not move, when she simply stood there, tired but unbroken, Kyle's patience snapped. He lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Hard. Gasps rippled through the building like a shockwave. The boy behind the register flinched so hard he nearly dropped his scanner. The manager crossed her arms and smirked. Kyle twisted Marsha's arm behind her back, snapping the cold steel of the cuffs onto her wrist with a practiced click. Marsha said nothing. She did not struggle. She did not plead. She stood tall even as they locked her in chains. As Kyle yanked her toward the door, other customers hurried to clear a path. Some looked away. Some recorded. None spoke up. Outside, the heat of the Georgia night pressed down like a heavy hand. The squad car waited at the curb, its lights off, its engine humming a low, menacing growl. Kyle shoved Marsha into the back seat without ceremony. The cuffs bit into her wrists. The vinyl seats burned against her skin. Still, She said nothing. Still, she did not lower her head. Through the glass, she caught one last glimpse of the pharmacy, the manager standing tall, arms folded like she had just won something, the boy at the counter, wide-eyed and guilty. The bystanders, already turning away, already forgetting. And then she did speak. She met Kyle Jefferson's cold, smug eyes through the mirror and said, in a voice carved from steel, "You are making the biggest mistake of your life." The door slammed shut, sealing her inside. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, and Marsha Dean sat in the back. The ghost in the hoodie no one had wanted to see, not realizing that the storm had already started, and it was heading straight for them. The ride to the station felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, because of the silence, the wrong kind of silence, the kind that presses against your chest until every breath feels like a battle, the kind that whispers, "You do not belong here. You never did." Marsha sat stiffly in the back seat. The handcuffs bit into her skin, metal against bone. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain up her arms, but she showed no reaction. Kyle Jefferson drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near his radio. From the angle of the rearview mirror, Marsha could see the smirk he thought he had hidden. Lucas Grant sat in the passenger seat, tapping his fingers against his knee. He looked uncomfortable, guilty, maybe, but not enough to speak, not enough to stop what was happening. They talked like she was not even there. "Another one thinking they can scam the system," Kyle muttered. Lucas mumbled something back, something too low for Marsha to hear, but it did not matter. She knew how these stories went. The roads blurred past outside her window, neon signs for gas stations, billboards for car insurance, a flicker of a church steeple under the purple wash of night. Marsha leaned her head back, not to rest, but to remember. She remembered the women she had sat with in emergency rooms, the mothers gripping the hands of sons shot in traffic stops gone wrong, the grandmothers who whispered prayers over broken bodies, the teenagers who never got the chance to grow old because someone decided they looked suspicious. Marsha had seen it all, and now she was one of them. The squad car jerked to a stop outside the Ashville Police Department, an old building, cracked paint, flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Kyle yanked the door open. "Out!" he barked. Marsha moved slowly, deliberately. The cuffs rattled as she slid her legs out, standing tall despite the ache in her back. Inside, the station smelled of old coffee and disinfectant. The walls were a sickly beige, stained with years of bad decisions. Officers stood around sipping from paper cups, pretending not to watch her, but their eyes followed her every step. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, barely looked up as Kyle shoved the paperwork at him. "Prescription fraud," Kyle said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Picked her up at Ridgeway Pharmacy. Caught in the act." The sergeant shrugged. Another black woman, another box to check. Marsha stood there, hands cuffed, hoodie damp with sweat. She felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken word. She knew the names they wanted to call her. Scammer, thief, criminal. Never mind the truth. Never mind the facts. Her documents had matched. Her name was correct. Her insurance valid. But none of that mattered, because the hoodie she wore told a different story, because the color of her skin told a different story, and the people in that room had already decided which story they believed. Kyle gestured roughly. "Take her back. Get her processed." A young female officer approached, hesitating for just a second when she met Marsha's eyes. There was a flicker of something there. Doubt, maybe, sympathy, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Marsha was led down a hallway. The walls closed in tighter with every step, concrete underfoot, fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects overhead. They fingerprinted her, photographed her, treated her like a case number instead of a person. When it was done, They shoved her into a holding cell. The door clanged shut behind her. She sat on the cold metal bench. The hoodie felt heavier now, soaked with sweat and shame and something hotter, something stronger, anger. But not the kind that burns out quickly. The slow kind, the kind that smolders until it is ready to move mountains. Hours dragged by. No phone call, no explanations. No one cared. In the dim light, Marsha closed her eyes and breathed deep, not because she was tired, because she was preparing. Out there somewhere a storm was already gathering. It had her name written in it, and the people who thought they had won tonight had no idea what they had just set in motion. When the reckoning came, it would not be loud. It would not be messy. It would be silent, relentless, unstoppable. Marsha Dean sat in her cell, back straight, head high, hoodie wrapped around her like armor. They thought they had broken her. They thought they had humiliated her, but they had only sharpened her resolve. Because you can chain a body, but you cannot chain the truth. And Marsha Dean carried more truth in her silence than they could ever hope to bury. Morning light crept into the Ashville Police Department, thin, pale, the kind of light that does not warm anything, just exposes. Marsha Dean sat on the bench, still wearing her hoodie, still cuffed. The hours had not broken her. They had hardened her. At 7:14 a.m., the door buzzed open. A woman in a press suit, sharp heels clicking across the linoleum, walked in. She held a clipboard and the air of someone who had already decided she was wasting her time. Marsha Dean, the woman said without looking up, "Follow me." The cuffs came off. Finally, Marsha rubbed her wrists once, briefly, and rose, silent. She was led down another hallway, into another fluorescent room. But this one had something different. It had a man waiting inside. A man in a suit so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. A man whose presence was like gravity pulling the air tighter. He stood when Marsha entered, took one look at her, nodded once. Arnold Dean, her husband, and for the first time since the night before, Marsha allowed herself to exhale. The woman with the clipboard cleared her throat. Awkward now. Well, this is Mr. Dean. He is listed as your legal representative. He has documents. Arnold said nothing to her. He only spoke to Marsha. "Come sit," he said gently. She did. He placed a thick manila envelope on the table between them, turned it so it faced the officers standing behind the glass wall. Then, and only then, did he speak to the room. "My wife," he began, his voice calm, slow, deliberate, "has been unlawfully detained for over 9 hours without being charged, without being read her rights, and without access to legal counsel." He opened the envelope, pulled out copies, printed copies, signed copies, hospital records, insurance approvals, prescription verifications, employment history, and a letter on Department of Justice letterhead certifying that Marsha Dean had, only last year, been awarded the highest commendation for service in crisis response during the national pandemic. Arnold slid the documents across the table with 2 fingers. They were available, he said. Had anyone bothered to look? The officers shifted behind the glass, suddenly interested in their shoes, their fingernails. The woman with the clipboard swallowed hard. I am sure it was just a misunderstanding," she stammered. Arnold's face did not change. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "It was a choice." The room felt smaller now, the walls closer. Marsha sat quietly, watching. She did not need to add anything. Arnold was not here for a debate. He was here to lay down facts. He pushed another sheet across the table, a formal complaint already filed to the South Carolina Department of Civil Rights, another to the Ashville Internal Affairs Division, another addressed to the local newspaper still folded neatly, but visible enough for the cameras to catch if they wanted to. Arnold Dean, the invisible hand that moved quietly behind high places, was not invisible today. He made sure they all saw. The woman with the clipboard faltered. I, I will get the chief, she said, almost whispering now. She scurried out. The door closed with a soft thud. Arnold turned back to Marsha. His eyes softened. You all right? He asked. Marsha nodded once. I am all right, she said simply. He nodded too. Once, as if they had just agreed on something sacred. Minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was a man in full uniform, badges polished, face tight. Chief Darrell Swanson, the kind of man who made apologies without ever saying the word sorry. He entered with a fake smile stretched across his weathered face. Mr. Dean, he started. Mrs. Dean. I think we can all agree this has been a terrible misunderstanding. I assure you, this department takes these matters seriously. And Arnold raised a hand. Cut him off without raising his voice. You will release my wife, he said. Today, now, publicly. The chief blinked. His smile faltered. Arnold continued. You will clear her record. You will issue a public apology, and you will launch a full review of the department's handling of minority detainments in this town. The chief shifted, struggling to find the right words. Arnold leaned back slightly, his voice as soft as a blade sliding into silk. Or you can explain to the federal court why my wife was treated as less than human on a simple pharmacy visit. Silence. Long, awkward, heavy. Finally, the chief nodded stiffly. We will arrange it. Arnold smiled once, a small, cold smile. It was not about punishment. It was about accountability. Marsha stood, still quiet, still calm. She had not raised her voice once, but somehow she had shaken an entire system. And the morning sun outside the station doors for the first time in a long time felt a little warmer. The station doors swung open with a hiss. Marsha Dean stepped out first. No cuffs, no handlers, no shame. The morning air hit her face, warm and sticky, thick with the scent of cut grass and asphalt baking under the sun. She paused just outside the threshold. Hoodie still draped around her shoulders like a flag that had survived a battle. Arnold followed a few steps behind, carrying the manila envelope tucked under one arm, his free hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Not pushing, not pulling, just there, steady. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered. Not much. A handful of people, some curious, some angry, some recording with phones lifted high like tiny shields against injustice. Among them, a reporter clutched a microphone, jostling to get closer. Mrs. Dean, she called out, voice high and eager. Mrs. Dean, do you have a statement about what happened here last night? Marsha stopped, turned. The reporter was young, white, dressed in a navy blazer too big for her frame, the kind of journalist still hungry to build a name maybe off someone else's pain. Marsha considered her carefully. Behind her, Arnold shifted slightly, ready to step in if needed. But Marsha raised one hand, a small gesture, calm. She walked forward slowly until there was only the microphone and a breath of space between them. And then softly she spoke. No comment. She said, the reporter blinked, stunned for a beat. Just 2 words, no outrage, no speech, no tears, just silence wrapped in dignity. Marsha turned and walked away. Sometimes, power was not about how loud you could shout. Sometimes, power was about what you refused to give them. The cameras kept rolling anyway, captured the way she lifted her chin just a little higher as she crossed the street, captured the way Arnold opened the passenger door of a sleek black sedan and waited for her to step inside before circling to the driver's side, captured the way the morning sun caught the edge of her gray hoodie and made it gleam like armor. By the time the police chief stepped out 30 seconds later to mumble a half-hearted apology into the microphones, no one was really listening. The story was already written. The drive back to their house was quiet, not strained, not broken, just full, like both of them were holding more than words could carry. Ashville blurred past outside the windows. Church steeples, barber shops, fast food drive-thrus just starting their breakfast rush. Life going on like nothing had happened. Like a woman had not been chained for daring to exist in a place she had every right to be. Arnold glanced sideways at her once. "You sure you don't want to say something?" he asked gently. Marcia kept her eyes forward. "I said enough." Arnold smiled faintly. He understood. He had spent his whole career in rooms where the loudest person was rarely the most powerful, where the real victories were decided by quiet papers, quiet meetings, and quiet refusal to back down. Marcia had not needed a speech. She had needed the world to see her dignity, unshaken, unbent. That was louder than anything. Back home, the world caught up fast. By noon, Marcia's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from coworkers, from neighbors, from strangers, some offering support, some offering apologies for not doing more. Even the Ridgeway pharmacy called not the manager. Of course, she had been suspended pending an investigation. It was the regional director this time, his voice thick with corporate regret. "Mrs. Dean, we are deeply sorry for the incident. We are launching a full internal review. We hope you will allow us to make this right." Marcia listened, nodded politely, hung up without committing to anything. She was not interested in free gift cards or hollow apologies. She wanted change, and change did not come from a coupon in the mail. It came from pressure, from sunlight, and thanks to the videos circulating online, the sunlight was already scorching. The clip of her arrest, the way Kyle Jefferson had grabbed her without cause, the way she had stood silent but unyielding, had gone viral. Justice for Marcia was trending. News stations replayed the footage in loops. Commentators debated it on morning talk shows. The town of Ashville, once so good at hiding its cracks, now found those cracks broadcast to every corner of the internet. Arnold watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. But Marcia kept her focus small. Laundry, bills, cooking dinner, the work of living, because she knew in the way only people who have survived long enough can know that victory was not a moment. It was a practice, a discipline, an everyday refusal to let them steal your peace. That night, after the dishes were done and the house settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, Marcia stepped out onto the front porch. The sky overhead was wide and heavy with stars. She pulled the hoodie tighter around her shoulders, listened to the crickets, the distant hum of traffic, and she smiled, not a big smile, not one meant for cameras or crowds, a small one, for herself, because she had survived, because she had kept her head up when they wanted her broken, because tomorrow would come and she would meet it standing. By morning, Asheville was not the same town anymore. At the Ridgeway pharmacy, reporters stood outside the automatic doors, cameras poised like rifles. Customers shuffled in and out under the heavy gaze of local news vans, their faces caught between curiosity and fear of being interviewed. Inside, Nancy Feldman, the same manager who had called the cops on Marsha Dean, sat behind the counter with her head down, pretending to check inventory. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from corporate, emails, warnings, formal notifications. Words like suspension, pending investigation, and public relations crisis danced across her screen like a slow death sentence. She barely looked up when her district supervisor walked in, flanked by two security guards. "Nancy," he said, his voice clipped and cold. "We need to talk in the office." Everyone saw it. Every employee, every customer, everyone saw her being led to the back without fanfare. Everyone saw the door swing shut behind her. Everyone heard the faint, urgent voices from behind the glass walls. By the end of the day, Nancy's nameplate was removed from the counter. Her time was over. Ashville had a new story now, and it did not end with her side of things. Across town at the Asheville Police Department, the fallout spread faster than wildfire. Kyle Jefferson arrived for his shift like nothing had changed. He even whistled as he walked up the cracked concrete steps, tossing his empty coffee cup into the trash without a care in the world. But inside, the walls were buzzing. Two detectives from Internal Affairs stood near the front desk. Stiff-backed and stern-faced, Chief Swanson leaned against the doorway of his office, arms folded, jaw tight. "Kyle," he called out. Kyle's steps faltered. He turned slowly. The detectives approached. "You need to come with us," one of them said, flashing a badge that meant business. "For what?" Kyle barked, the first flicker of panic sneaking into his voice. "Investigation." The detective replied simply, "Regarding use of force, civil rights violations, possible misconduct." Kyle laughed once, a short, brittle sound. "This is ridiculous." He spat. "I followed procedure." She looked suspicious. The chief cut him off with a single raised hand. "You embarrass this department," he said. "You brought a national spotlight on us." "Kyle, we do not survive that." Before Kyle could argue, the detectives flanked him, guiding him away. And just like that, the swagger was gone. The camera phones in the lobby captured everything. The look on Kyle's face, the silence from his fellow officers. The way the badge on his chest, the one he thought made him untouchable, suddenly looked very, very small. At home, Marsha Dean watched the news unfold, not with glee, not with triumph, with quiet resolve. She sipped her tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her hands. Arnold sat across from her at the kitchen table, a laptop open between them. "Looks like they are trying to spin it now," he said, scrolling through headlines. "Asheville police pledges reform, pharmacy issues statement, promising sensitivity training, city officials call for unity after arrest scandal." Marsha smiled faintly. "Training," she murmured, "as if decency can be taught in a 2-hour seminar." Arnold chuckled once, dry and low. She set her cup down. "I do not want a plaque," she said. "I do not want a photo op. I want every woman who walks into that pharmacy after me to know she belongs. I want every kid who wears a hoodie in this town to walk free without being a suspect." Arnold nodded. He understood. This was not about winning a news cycle. It was about shifting the ground beneath their feet, making it so the next black woman did not have to be brave just to exist, making it so the next boy in a hoodie did not have to pray that someone would see him as human. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Marsha answered it to find a group of local college students standing nervously on the porch. They held handmade signs. One read, "We stand with Marsha." Another, "Hoodies are not crimes." Their leader, a young woman with tight braids and fierce eyes, stepped forward. "Mrs. Dean," she said, "we are organizing a peaceful march this weekend. In your honor, for justice, for everyone." Marsha looked at them, their hope, their fire, their stubborn belief that things could change. She smiled. A real smile this time. Not for cameras, not for show, just for them. "Thank you," she said, simple, honest. They asked her if she would walk with them. She hesitated, not because she was afraid, because she understood the weight of it. Finally, she nodded. "I will walk," she said. The porch erupted in cheers. The students hugged each other, buzzing with energy. Marsha watched them go, her heart heavier and lighter all at once. She closed the door gently behind her and leaned her forehead against the wood for a moment, gathering herself, because she knew the first strike had been made, but the real battle was just beginning. And when she walked into that march, Hoodie pulled up against the sun, she would not just be walking for herself, she would be walking for every black story that had been silenced, for every voice they had tried to erase, for the dignity that no one could take without a fight. The day of the march arrived hotter than anyone expected. South Carolina summers had a way of wrapping around you, thick and heavy, like an invisible hand on your throat. By noon, the streets of downtown Ashville shimmered under the weight of the sun. Sidewalks baked. Air tasted like asphalt and sweat, but still they came. Hundreds of them, young and old, black and white, hoodies and t-shirts, banners lifted high, signs scrawled with Sharpie and hope. Hoodies are not weapons. Dignity has no color. We stand with Marsha. Marsha Dean stood at the head of the crowd. Hoodie pulled up against the sun, gray and familiar. It felt like armor now. Not just fabric. Arnold was beside her, steady as always. The young woman who had knocked on her door. Her name was Jayla, took the megaphone and raised her voice. Today, she said, we walk not just for Mrs. Dean. We walk for every black kid who was stopped for nothing, for every mother who had to teach her son how to survive a traffic stop, for every woman who had to make herself smaller just to stay safe. The crowd roared in agreement. Marsha felt the vibration of it under her feet, a low thrum of something ancient and unstoppable. They began to walk, slow, purposeful, through the heart of the town that had tried to shrink her into silence. It started small at first, whispers from the storefronts, curtains twitching in second-story windows, a few sneers from people clutching their purses tighter as the march passed. Asheville was not used to protests. Asheville was used to parades shiny, neat, sponsored by banks and car dealerships. Not this. Not a sea of hoodies marching through Main Street, refusing to disappear. The police presence was thick. Officers lined the sidewalks, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding their eyes. Some watched passively, some scowled openly. Marsha kept her gaze forward. She was not here for them. She was here for the kids walking behind her, for the elders shuffling slowly but proudly, for the mothers pushing strollers with cardboard signs taped to the sides. She was here because silence had not saved her, and it would not save them. Halfway down Main Street, the first real strike came. A man stepped out from a cafe doorway, white, mid-40s, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He held a large soda in one hand. In the other, his phone, recording. He shouted over the crowd noise, voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, hoodie lady, why don't you steal something else while you're at it?" Some people laughed. Others winced. Marsha did not break stride. But the man was not done. He stepped into the street, blocking their path. "You think wearing a sweatshirt makes you a victim?" he sneered. "You think marching changes anything? You are still just a crook in cotton." Jayla tried to step between him and Marsha, but Marsha touched her shoulder gently. It was not her fight. It was Marsha's. She turned and faced the man, face calm, breath steady. The crowd hushed around her. The cameras turned. The man smirked, thinking he had won, thinking he had forced her into a reaction. Marsha lifted her hand slowly and pointed to the sign Jayla held, the one that read, "We stand with Marsha." She did not say a word. She did not need to. The man opened his mouth to spit another insult, but before he could, a teenage boy near the front of the march shouted back, "You are scared," the boy said loudly. The crowd rippled with energy. "You are scared because you know we are not backing down anymore." The man flushed dark red. People around him began pulling out their phones, recording every second. He cursed under his breath and backed away into the doorway, trying to shield his face. The march surged forward again. Marsha walked through the space he had left behind without hesitation, without anger, without fear, because his words did not define her, because no insult could stick to someone who had already claimed her own worth. By the time they reached the steps of City Hall, the crowd had nearly doubled. The local news vans trailed behind, their reporters scrambling to capture footage. Jayla climbed the stairs first, then turned and offered a hand to Marsha. Marsha hesitated, not from fear, from the weight of it. The knowledge that once she stepped up onto that stage, once she spoke, there would be no going back. Not for her, not for Ashville. She took the hand. She climbed. And as she turned to face the sea of faces stretched out before her, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds overhead. The light caught the edges of her gray hoodie, turning it silver, a beacon, a warning, a promise. Marsha Dean took the microphone in both hands, and the world leaned in to listen. The microphone felt heavier than it looked. It was not just a piece of metal and wire. It was the weight of every moment Marsha Dean had stayed silent. Every moment she had swallowed anger instead of speaking. Every time she had lowered her eyes so that others would not feel uncomfortable. Not today. She took a breath, slow, deep, the kind of breath you take before stepping into deep water. The crowd waited. The cameras waited. The town waited. Marsha spoke. "My name is Marsha Dean," she said, voice low but steady. "And I am not here today because I wanted attention. I am here because I refuse to disappear." A ripple moved through the crowd, not noise, but something deeper, a shift, a gathering of breath. "I am a nurse. I am a mother. I am a daughter of this town." She paused. "I wore a hoodie to pick up my medication. I was treated like a criminal before anyone asked a question, before anyone looked at the facts, before anyone saw me." The wind picked up, snapping some of the banners in the crowd. Marsha tightened her grip on the microphone. "They wanted me to feel ashamed," she said. "They wanted me to lower my head and accept that being black, being tired, being human, somehow made me dangerous." She looked out across the sea of faces, the teenagers with fists clenched at their sides, the old men in Sunday suits, the mothers with babies balanced on their hips. "But I am not dangerous," she said, voice rising now. "I am not the threat here. I am the reminder. The reminder that dignity does not come with permission slips, that respect is not something you can gatekeep, that justice is not something you get to hand out to only the people you are comfortable with." The applause started slowly, a few claps, a few cheers. Then it rolled across the crowd like thunder. Marsha waited until it settled again. There was more she needed to say. "I stand here today because people before me refused to stay silent," she said. "I walk today because people fought for my right to exist without apology, and I will not stop walking. I will not stop speaking." She lowered the microphone just a fraction, her next words quieter but sharper. "And I am telling every person who has ever felt invisible in this town." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of it settle into every chest. "We see you now." The roar that came from the crowd was not polite applause. It was not obligation. It was the sound of a dam breaking. It was the sound of a people who had waited too long to be seen. Marsha handed the microphone back to Jayla, stepped back from the podium. For a moment, she stood on the steps alone. Hoodie pulled over her head, sunlight making a halo out of the dust in the air. Then Jayla lifted her megaphone. "This march," Jayla shouted, "is just the beginning. This is not just about one woman. This is not just about one arrest. This is about all of us. This is about every time someone was told to sit down, to shut up, to stay small." The crowd roared again. Signs lifted higher. Banners snapped in the wind. Marsha watched it all, a slow warmth blooming in her chest. Not pride, not exactly. Something fiercer, something stronger. Hope, real hope. Not the hope that things might magically get better. Not the hope that if you are good enough, quiet enough, safe enough, they will let you in. The hope that comes from knowing you are not alone anymore, that you never were. In the crowd, faces shone with sweat and determination. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Elderly women wiped their eyes with wrinkled hands. Someone began to sing soft at first, then louder. We shall not, we shall not be moved. Others joined in, the old freedom song rising up into the bright, punishing sky. Marsha closed her eyes for a moment, listened, felt the ground beneath her feet, felt the air move around her, felt the truth settle deep in her bones. She had been humiliated. She had been handcuffed. She had been made to feel small. But today, she had taken that humiliation and built something out of it. A bridge, a fire, a path forward. And she was not walking it alone. Not anymore. After the speeches ended, the crowd stayed. They milled around City Hall, filling the courthouse steps, spilling into the streets. No one seemed in a hurry to leave. It was as if the town itself had been holding its breath for years, and now, finally, it was allowed to exhale. Marsha Dean stood off to the side now, no longer at the center, no longer holding a microphone, but somehow more visible than ever. People approached her one by one. Some just nodded. Some offered quiet thanks. Some wrapped her in fierce, wordless hugs. Marsha accepted each moment with quiet grace. She knew this was not about her alone. It never had been. It was about everyone who had ever walked into a room and felt like a threat just because they existed. It was about everyone who had ever been humiliated and told to swallow it, told to smile, told to be grateful it was not worse. It was about reclaiming the space they were told they did not deserve. Somewhere near the fountain, Jayla was organizing volunteers. People were already setting up tents, handing out water bottles, passing out voter registration forms. Ashville was waking up to itself, and it would not be going back to sleep easily. Arnold found Marsha leaning against the lamppost, eyes half closed against the sun. "You ready to head home?" he asked. Marsha smiled faintly. "Not just yet," she said. Arnold nodded. He understood. There were moments you did not rush. You let them stretch, breathe, sink into your bones, moments that stitch themselves into the fabric of who you were. This was one of those moments. Across the street, a commotion started, raised voices, movement. Marsha straightened, scanning the crowd. At first, she thought it was another protester arguing with police, but then she saw him, the man from the cafe, the one who had tried to humiliate her in the middle of the march. He was back, and he was not alone. This time, he had friends with him, 3 men, all wearing matching shirts emblazoned with a local motorcycle club logo. They were shouting at the marchers, pushing signs aside, trying to bait someone into reacting, trying to make the story turn ugly. Police officers started moving in, but slowly, too slowly. Marsha could see it happening. She could see how easily everything could unravel. One shove, one wrong word, one snap of anger, and everything they had built would be painted as violent, dangerous, exactly the story the world wanted to tell about people who looked like her. Jayla saw it too. She grabbed the megaphone again, climbing onto the edge of the fountain. "Do not engage," she shouted. "Stay peaceful, stay strong." Marsha moved without thinking. She walked through the crowd, hoodie still up, steady as stone. When she reached the men, she did not yell. She did not argue. She simply stepped between them and the marchers, silent, unmoving, a wall of calm in the middle of the storm. The man from the cafe sneered at her. "What? You think you are some kind of hero?" Now he spat. "You think marching around in your little hoodie changes anything?" Marsha looked at him, really looked, not with hatred, not with fear, with something heavier, older, pity. "You are not my enemy," she said, voice low and sure. "You are just scared." The man blinked, caught off guard. "You are scared because you know deep down that we are not going anywhere." Marsha continued, "You are scared because you know this town is changing, and you cannot stop it." The crowd had gone utterly silent. Every camera pointed at them, every microphone recording every word. The man flushed red. He opened his mouth to speak, to curse, to shout, to lash out, but he looked around, saw the phones, saw the eyes, and for the first time realized he was outnumbered, outmatched, outgrown. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his friends trailing behind him. The police, finally close enough to intervene, watched them go, relieved not to have to get involved. Marsha stood there for a moment longer, not victorious, just certain, certain that something had shifted today, not just for her, for Ashville, for every hoodie that walked those streets. When she returned to where Arnold waited, he said nothing. He just opened the car door for her like he always did. Marsha slid inside, pulling the hoodie down from her head at last. The car pulled away from the courthouse, and as it did, Marsha looked out at the crowd one more time, saw the signs, the banners, the children on their parents' shoulders, a town learning to breathe differently, a town learning to see differently. And she thought maybe humiliation was not the final word after all. Maybe dignity could be louder, maybe it could be contagious, maybe it already was. The days after the march were different. The air in Asheville crackled with something new, not anger, not fear, awareness. People were paying attention now. Stores that had once ignored black customers now trained their clerks to greet everyone. Schools that had brushed off complaints about bias suddenly hosted diversity assemblies. Even the mayor issued a public statement, promising reforms and better police training. On the surface, it looked like progress, but underneath the resentment grew, the kind that does not show its teeth right away, the kind that festers in corners, behind closed doors. Marsha Dean could feel it, the stares a little longer, the smiles a little tighter, the way conversations paused when she walked into a room. She was no longer invisible, she was unavoidable. And not everyone liked it. It started small, an anonymous email to her hospital's administration accusing Marsha of misconduct, of violating patient privacy, of using hospital resources for political purposes. No evidence, no names, just enough poison to make people start asking questions, just enough smoke to make it seem like maybe there was fire. Marsha was called into a meeting. The HR officer, a young woman who could not quite meet her eyes, slid a printout of the email across the table. "We have to follow protocol," she said apologetically. "We have to investigate." Marsha nodded. She was not surprised, not anymore. Next came the social media posts, anonymous accounts posting screenshots of her mugshot, the one taken the night she was arrested at the pharmacy. They cropped it close, darkened the image, added captions, "Criminal in a hoodie. This is who they are marching for." The posts were shared in private groups first, then leaked into the wider world. Suddenly, Marsha's inbox was flooded. Hate mail, threats, messages dripping with racism and venom. Some told her to leave Asheville. Some told her worse. Arnold found her sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at her laptop, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Without a word, he closed the lid. He placed his hand gently over hers. "You do not have to read it," he said. Marsha shook her head. "I have to know," she whispered, not because she wanted to, because she needed to understand what she was up against, because you cannot fight what you refuse to see. The final blow came a week later. She received a letter in the mail, no return address, just her name, written in shaky block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed article from a fake news site claiming Marsha had been fired for theft years ago, claiming she had a history of fraudulent behavior, claiming she was not a hero, but a habitual liar. All lies, all designed to smear her name, to undo what she had built, to make people doubt. Arnold stood over her shoulder, reading the letter. His jaw tightened. "This is slander," he said. "We can sue." Marsha folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope. "No," she said quietly. "Not yet." Arnold frowned. They are trying to break you, he said. Marsha looked up at him, eyes steady. They are trying to scare me, she corrected. But fear only works if you let it. She stood, hoodie draped loose over her shoulders. She had worn it almost every day since the march. Not out of defiance, out of remembrance, a reminder of who she was and who they were trying to silence. Later that night, Marcia sat alone on the porch. The sky stretched wide and heavy above her. The town was quiet, too quiet. She could feel the tension thick in the air, like the pause before a storm. She sipped her tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. She thought about every black woman who had walked this road before her, who had stood tall when the world tried to shrink them, who had smiled with dignity even when their names were dragged through the mud. Marcia smiled too, a small one, knowing smile, because the people who had sent that letter, the people who hid behind fake accounts and cowardly whispers, they had already lost. They just did not know it yet, because when you cross the line from hatred into fear, you reveal more about yourself than about your target. And Marsha Dean had never been the one who needed to be afraid. Not then, not now, not ever. The next morning, Marcia woke to the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. It was early, the sky still brushed with the faintest pink, the world not yet fully awake. Arnold had already gone into the kitchen, coffee brewing, the house alive with the soft hum of normal life. But something felt off. Marcia moved to the window, peering through the curtain. A black sedan sat at the end of the driveway, unmarked, engine running. Inside, two men sat, one in the driver's seat, one in the passenger's, suits, sunglasses, the kind of presence that did not belong on her quiet street. Arnold joined her at the window. He cursed under his breath. "Looks like they are escalating," he said. Marcia nodded once. No fear, just resignation. She had seen intimidation tactics before, in bigger cities, during messier fights, but seeing it here, in her own front yard, made it feel real in a new way. They decided not to call the police. Marcia knew better. Who would they send Kyle Jefferson's friends? No, that was not how this would be handled. Instead, she pulled on her hoodie, the same gray one, tied the strings loosely, and stepped onto the porch. Arnold stayed just behind her, a silent wall of strength. Marcia stood tall, hands in her pockets, and stared directly at the sedan. She made no move toward them. She said no words. She just stood there, unmoving, unshaken. After a long moment, the engine revved. The sedan backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. No confrontation, no theatrics, just a message sent and a message answered. But it did not stop there. At the hospital where Marcia worked, whispers started to grow louder. A few nurses gave her tight smiles that did not reach their eyes. Doctors who once joked with her in the break room now kept conversations brief. Someone left a note in her locker. No words, just a drawing, a hoodie, a pair of handcuffs. The meaning was clear. They were trying to push her out, trying to make her leave on her own. Marcia held the note in her hands, smoothing the crumpled edges. She could have reported it, could have escalated it, but she knew how these games worked. They wanted her reactive. They wanted her emotional. They wanted her to slip. Instead, she calmly placed the note back into the locker, closed the door, and went back to work. Because Marsha Dean did not run, not when she was tired, not when she was angry, not when they tried to make her feel small, especially not then. That evening, a town hall meeting was scheduled, a direct response to the public outcry after Marsha's arrest and the subsequent march. The mayor had promised a frank conversation about race, policing, and community trust. Marsha debated whether to go. She knew what kind of theater these events often were: carefully controlled speeches, empty promises wrapped in polite applause. But Jayla called her personally Mrs. Dean, she said, voice earnest through the phone. We need you there. Your presence matters. So Marsha agreed. She did not do it for herself. She did it for Jayla, for the students, for the marchers, for the next Marsha Dean who might one day walk into Ridgeway Pharmacy wearing a hoodie and expect to be treated with respect. City Hall was packed, standing room only. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras clicking like insects. The mayor stood at a podium, flanked by city council members and a few nervous-looking police officers. Marsha sat quietly in the third row, hoodie pulled low over her forehead. She listened as the mayor talked about progress and healing. She listened as a police spokesman listed new initiatives and training modules. Words, so many words, and so little meaning behind them. When the floor opened for public comment, Jayla was the first to rise. She spoke passionately about the need for real accountability. She named names, cited statistics, demanded transparency. The room shifted, uncomfortable. When Jayla finished, she turned and looked at Marsha, a silent question. Will you speak? Marsha stood, slowly, deliberately. The room quieted. Every head turned, every camera pointed. She walked to the microphone, her hoodie shadowing her face. She took a long breath before speaking. My name is Marsha Dean, she said, voice clear and steady. I was arrested without cause. I was humiliated without reason. I was treated as less than human because of assumptions built into the bones of this town. She scanned the crowd. Some met her gaze. Some looked away. But understand this, she continued. I will not be your scapegoat. I will not be your cautionary tale. And I will not be your silent shame. You crossed a line when you tried to erase my dignity, and you will not erase my story. She stepped back from the microphone. No applause, just silence, heavy, uncomfortable, honest, and Marsha Dean returned to her seat without looking back. Because she did not need their approval. She already had her power, and they could not take it, not ever again. When the town hall ended, the crowd spilled out into the night. The heavy air was thick with conversation, some angry, some inspired, some just confused. No one knew quite what to do with the silence Marsha Dean had left hanging in that room. It was not rage. It was not sadness. It was a mirror. And the people of Ashville were not ready for the reflection staring back at them. Outside, under the harsh yellow glow of streetlights, reporters swarmed, microphones, cameras, questions fired rapid and sharp. Mrs. Dean, do you believe the police reforms will be enough? Mrs. Dean, are you considering legal action? Mrs. Dean, what do you say to those who claim this has divided the town? Marsha stood still, letting the questions swirl around her like leaves in a storm. She waited for them to tire themselves out. Then she spoke. One sentence. Change never comes wrapped in comfort. And with that, she turned away, leaving them holding their questions, leaving them holding their fears. She and Arnold walked to their car in silence. The streets of Asheville felt different now. Not hostile, not welcoming either. Just exposed. Truth hung in the air, undeniable and raw. And truth, Marsha knew, was a dangerous thing to the people who had built their lives on pretending otherwise. The next few days moved strangely. At the hospital, things sharpened. The note in her locker was replaced with something more crude, spray paint this time. A slur scrawled across the wall near the nurse's entrance. Administration acted quickly. Security footage reviewed. Statements gathered. But Marsha knew they would find nothing, or pretend they found nothing, because admitting the rot meant admitting they had let it grow for years. So Marsha scrubbed the wall herself. In silence, in the heat of a South Carolina afternoon, one of the new interns, a young black woman fresh out of nursing school, tried to help, but Marsha waved her off gently. This is not your fight, she said. The young woman frowned. It feels like it is. She whispered. Marsha smiled. Not sad, not angry, proud. Then fight smarter than they expect you to, she said, and never give them your peace. The smear campaign did not stop. Whispers floated through town like smoke. Marsha was unstable. Marsha was radical. Marsha was dangerous. It was almost laughable. If it had not been so predictable, Marsha did not chase the lies. She did not hold press conferences. She did not flood social media with denials. She lived her life, visible, unapologetic. And that was what enraged them most, that she refused to be the villain they needed her to be. One night, Marsha and Arnold sat on their porch. The air was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of magnolias. Arnold held a folder in his lap, legal papers. If Marsha wanted, she could sue for wrongful arrest, for emotional distress, for slander. They would win. They both knew it. The evidence was overwhelming. But Marsha hesitated. She watched a firefly drift lazily through the humid night, lit up for a moment, then gone, lit up again, gone again. Do you want to fight this way? Arnold asked softly. Marsha sipped her tea, let the warmth fill her chest. No, she said finally. I want to build something bigger than a lawsuit. Arnold nodded. He understood. Lawsuits punish. Stories change. And Marsha Dean had chosen her battlefield. She founded a nonprofit, Silent Power Initiative, focused on teaching young Black students how to advocate for themselves, how to document injustices, how to protect their rights without losing their dignity, how to turn humiliation into fuel. The first meeting was small, 10 students in the basement of a local church. Jayla helped organize it. Arnold handled the logistics. Marsha stood at the front of the room, hoodie sleeves pushed up, clipboard in hand. This is not about making noise for the sake of noise, she said. This is about power, silent, steady, unbreakable. She looked at their faces, eager, angry, hopeful, faces that reminded her of herself at 16, at 20, at 45. This town tried to humiliate me. She said simply, they tried to shame me. But shame only sticks if you accept it. And I don't. And neither should you. That night, Marsha walked home under a sky heavy with stars. No news cameras, no reporters, just her, and the knowledge that every step she took was carving a path wider for someone else. The hoodie on her back felt light now, not because the burden was gone, but because she had stopped carrying it alone. Ashville had crossed a line, and in doing so, they had set something free, something they could not silence, something they could not cage, something that would outlast every whisper, every threat, every attempt to erase her. Marsha Dean walked on, silent, powerful, unstoppable. It was a Tuesday morning when the storm truly began. The mail came later than usual. Arnold Dean stood at the front door, sorting through envelopes, bills, flyers, the usual noise when he spotted it, a plain white envelope, no return address, his name printed neatly on the front. He felt the chill before he even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed words, short, brutal. You made a mistake. Walk away or watch her fall. No signature, no threats of violence. Just a warning cold enough to freeze the blood. Arnold folded the letter carefully, walked back into the kitchen where Marsha was stirring a pot of oatmeal. He did not speak right away. He placed the letter on the counter between them. Marsha glanced down, read it once, then went back to stirring, her hands steady, her shoulders unbowed. Arnold watched her for a long moment. He knew what she was thinking. She was thinking about pride, about resilience, about fighting the long fight. But Arnold, he was thinking about something else now. He was thinking about protection, about what a man does when the system refuses to do its job, about what it means to be a shield when words are no longer enough. The shadow inside him stirred, slow, silent, ready. Arnold Dean had always been the quiet one. In law school, While others blustered and grandstood, he sat in the back of the lecture hall, listening, calculating. When he graduated top of his class, people were shocked. They should not have been. Power, he had learned early, was not about being loud. It was about being inevitable. And Arnold Dean had spent a lifetime making himself inevitable. He was not a man who believed in revenge. Revenge was messy, sloppy. It gave your enemies too much satisfaction. But consequences real, permanent, legal consequences, those were a different story. Arnold poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and began to make phone calls. By noon, the wheels were already turning. A civil rights attorney and Columbia old friend still owed Arnold a favor. A private investigator in Atlanta, best in the business at uncovering dirty laundry, and discreet about it too. A national journalist Arnold had helped during a high-profile corruption case years back, eager for a new story, one about a small town, a woman in a hoodie, and the people who thought they could crush her with lies and whispers. Arnold laid it out methodically. No drama, just facts, dates, names, connections. He was building a case, not for court, for the court of public opinion, for the kind of justice that does not wait for permission. Meanwhile, Marsha continued her life with quiet defiance. She went to work. She taught her classes at the Silent Power Initiative. She walked through Ashville with her head high, hoodie up, daring anyone to meet her gaze. She refused to let fear hollow her out. But Arnold watched how the stairs sharpened, watched how cars slowed down when she crossed the street, watched how even old friends began to find excuses not to say hello. He knew the pattern: isolation, intimidation, escalation. Arnold Dean was not about to wait for step 3. At home, he converted the spare bedroom into a command center. Files spread across the desk, photos pinned to a corkboard, diagrams connecting Asheville's power players, the police chief, the pharmacy owner, the mayor's cousin who happened to run the local conservative blog smearing Marsha's name. Connections the town thought no one would ever bother to look for. Arnold bothered. He traced the money, followed the rumors, mapped the alliances built in whispered conversations over steak dinners and golf games. And slowly, meticulously, he built a weapon they would not see coming, because when the shadow wakes, it does not shout, it does not rage, it moves, unseen, relentless, inevitable. One evening, Marsha found Arnold at his desk, surrounded by papers. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You planning a coup?" she teased lightly. Arnold smiled without looking up. "Something like that," he said. Marsha walked over, placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You do not have to do this," she said. Arnold finally looked at her, softness and steel in his eyes. "I do," he said simply, "because they crossed a line. And when they cross a line with you," he added, voice low and certain, "they cross a line with me." Marsha squeezed his shoulder once, no more words needed. She understood, because sometimes the loudest battles are fought in silence. Sometimes the most powerful answers are never shouted. They are simply done. And when the shadow moves, there is no stopping it, only surviving it. By Thursday, Arnold Dean had what he needed. The documents stacked neatly on his desk were not angry letters or loud demands. They were precise, surgical, a blueprint of how corruption had snaked its way through Asheville for decades, hidden in plain sight. He had names, dates, financial records, emails quietly leaked by someone inside City Hall who had finally had enough. It was not just Marsha's story anymore. It was bigger, much bigger. Arnold leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. He thought about strategy the way a chess master thinks about an endgame, not about the next move, about the 10th move, the 20th. He thought about what would happen when this information dropped, the denials, the scrambling, the panic. And he smiled, Not because he wanted chaos, but because he wanted truth. And sometimes truth needed a little help making itself heard. The first call he made was to Vanessa King, an investigative reporter with a reputation for blowing the lid off dirty small-town politics. They met once years ago. During a federal case in another city, she owed Arnold, and she loved a good story. He did not give her everything, just enough to bait the hook. The pharmacy owner's cozy business deals with city officials, the police department's history of complaints quietly buried, the mayor's involvement in suppressing evidence during Marsha's case. Vanessa's eyes lit up over the phone. "I can have a team on this by tomorrow," she said, barely able to hide her excitement. Arnold gave her one instruction: do not just tell them what happened. He said, show them who they really are. Vanessa promised she would, and Arnold believed her. She had been waiting for a story like this. Ashville was not ready. Next, Arnold reached out to the legal team. The civil rights attorney from Columbia had already begun drafting a formal complaint to the state attorney general. It was a thing of beauty, cold, precise, deadly, a document not designed just to win a case, but to open a wound so wide the whole country would have to look inside. The attorney spoke fast, excited. This could be precedent-setting, he said, a textbook case of systemic bias and abuse of power. Arnold listened, nodded, made plans, because he was not just aiming for justice for Marsha, he was aiming for systemic change, permanent, irreversible, the kind they would be talking about long after the cameras left. At home, Marsha watched him work with a mixture of pride and worry. She understood what he was doing. She understood why. But she also understood something else. When you expose rot, you do not just face angry words. You face desperate people. People who feel their power slipping through their fingers. People who will do anything to claw it back. She said nothing, though. She trusted Arnold, trusted that he had weighed the risks, trusted that he knew how far to push. Still, every time he left the house now, a small knot twisted tighter in her chest. Not fear exactly, something older, something heavier, a knowing. That change, real change, always came with a cost, and she prayed silently that they would be strong enough to pay it. By Saturday morning, the first bomb dropped. Vanessa King published her article, front page, above the fold, in black bold letters, Asheville's Silent Corruption, How a Town Failed Its Own. The article was brutal. It named names. It cited documents. It included direct quotes from whistleblowers inside City Hall. It even included a timeline of how the town had systematically tried to destroy Marsha Dean's reputation. The local news exploded. Statewide coverage picked it up by noon. National news outlets by nightfall. The phones at City Hall rang off the hook. The police chief refused interviews. The mayor canceled public appearances. The pharmacy owner issued a clumsy statement about misunderstandings and unfortunate events, which only made things worse. And through it all, Marsha Dean stayed silent. She did not hold press conferences. She did not issue dramatic statements. She simply lived her life, visible, unapologetic, unbroken, and somehow that silence made the noise around her deafening. On Sunday, Arnold sat on the porch, laptop balanced on his knees, coffee cooling at his side. He was tired, bone tired, but a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing work that matters. Marsha joined him, 2 mugs of fresh coffee in hand. She passed him one without a word, sat beside him. They watched the sun rise over Ashville, a town that would never be the same again. Arnold sipped his coffee, checked the news. Another article, another headline, another crack in the wall. Marsha leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. Arnold shook his head. "We did it." He thought, but he did not say it out loud. Some things did not need to be spoken. Some victories were too big for words. By Monday morning, Asheville was a town under siege. Not from protests, Not from violence, from the truth. Everywhere Marsha Dean went, she saw the fallout. At the grocery store, people whispered behind shelves of canned goods. At the gas station, an elderly man tipped his hat to her with a kind of quiet apology in his eyes. She was no longer just the woman in the hoodie. She was a symbol now, proof that a quiet voice could shatter a town's comfortable lies. Proof that silence, when chosen carefully, could be a weapon sharper than any blade. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the real panic had begun. The city council called an emergency session. The police chief tendered his resignation under the soft excuse of health concerns. The mayor issued a public statement promising full cooperation with the investigations, even as he hired one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state. The pharmacy was sold overnight to an out-of-town corporation trying to clean the stink off its brand. Ashville was eating itself alive in slow motion. And Marsha watched it happen with the patience of someone who knew storms do not last forever. Only the damage does. But not everyone surrendered gracefully. Some fought back the only way they knew how. Ugly. Late one night, Marsha's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered instinctively. A voice, low and shaking with anger, spat into the line. "You think you won? Huh? You think you're better than us? You ain't nothing but a troublemaker. You better watch your back." Then the click. Silence. Marsha set the phone down calmly. Arnold looked up from the paperwork he was reviewing. "Another one," he asked. Marsha nodded. He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. No panic, no freedom, no fear. They had been expecting this. Because when the shadow wakes, when you expose people's worst selves to the light, they do not go quietly. They thrash. They threaten, Turninamen, Isurnachan. They try to claw back what they lost. But threats only work on those who still have something to lose. And Marsha Dean had already lost her invisibility. There was nothing left to take. The next day, the Silent Power Initiative held its largest class yet. Over 50 students packed into the old church basement. Kids in hoodies and sneakers, some still wary, some already burning with new fire. Jayla introduced Marsha to the room with a simple, powerful statement. "This woman taught us that silence is not weakness." Marsha stepped forward. No script, just her. She spoke plainly. "You will be told to shrink," she said. "You will be told to stay quiet. They will make you feel like speaking up is causing the trouble, not exposing it. But understand this, the trouble was already there. You are just pulling back the curtain." The students listened, wide-eyed. Some took notes. Some just stared, trying to memorize every word. Marsha smiled. Not a smile for cameras. A real one. Certain one. The kind that came from knowing you had planted something that would outgrow you. After the session ended, a small boy, no more than 10 years old, approached her. His hoodie was too big for his frame. His hands trembled slightly as he held out a scrap of notebook paper. It was a drawing. A woman in a hoodie, standing tall. Behind her, a crowd of people holding hands, marching forward. Marsha knelt down, taking the paper carefully. "Is this me?" she asked. The boy nodded shyly. "I drew you," he said. "You're the strongest person I ever saw." Marsha felt something catch in her throat. Not sadness. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. The realization that even when you fight for yourself, you are fighting for people you may never even meet. You are fighting for the boy with the trembling hands. The girl who does not know she can say no yet. The man who has been silent too long and finally finds his voice. You are fighting for futures you will never live to see. Marsha hugged the boy gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are strong too." And she meant it. Because courage is contagious. And somewhere, deep inside that boy's heart, a shadow was waking too. Not a shadow of fear, a shadow of strength. That night, back on the porch, Marsha and Arnold sat in the fading warmth. The stars overhead were hidden behind a veil of low clouds. The air smelled of earth and rain. Arnold flipped through the latest headlines. The state attorney general had opened a formal inquiry. The Department of Justice had requested documents from Ashville's police department. The wheels were turning now. Flauntry, suiny, slow, grinding, but inevitable, just like they had planned. Arnold set the papers down, looked at Marsha. "You ready for what's next?" he asked. Marsha smiled faintly. "I was born ready," she said. And it was true, because she had not started this fight, but she would finish it. Quietly, relentlessly, completely, because once the shadow wakes, it never goes back to sleep. Fall in Ashville used to arrive gently, a slow drift of cooler air, pumpkins on porches, high school football games filling Friday nights with noise and hope. But not this year. This year, fall arrived like a reckoning, and it started at City Hall. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Whistleblowers came out of the woodwork, fueled by the safety that Marsha Dean's fight had created. Anonymous tip lines flooded with reports, old cases dusted off and re-examined. Vanessa King, the reporter, kept the heat on. Every morning, a new headline: missing funds tied to former mayor's office, police department hid use of force reports, council members linked to pharmacy kickback scheme. Ashville was bleeding out in the public eye, and there was no bandage big enough to stop it. Marsha watched it unfold the same way she had faced everything else. Quietly, carefully, steadily. She still went to work, still taught her students, still wore her hoodie through the grocery store, daring anyone to look away. Because surviving was a form of resistance too. Because dignity is not just standing up once, it is standing up every day after. At a special city council meeting held in late October, the final blow landed. The mayor, once smug, once invincible, resigned under the weight of public scandal. He tried to spin it. Of course, talked about family obligations and health concerns. But everyone knew. They knew because of the pictures, the leaked emails, the taped conversations. The truth was not something he could spin anymore. It had him by the throat, and it squeezed. The police chief, who had resigned earlier, faced his own consequences. A federal investigation uncovered years of mishandled complaints and internal cover-ups. He was indicted on multiple charges, including obstruction of justice. The local pharmacy owner facing civil suits from several customers who had been wrongly profiled or denied service based on race. Even Nancy Feldman, the manager who started it all, was not spared. After being fired from the pharmacy, she tried to find work elsewhere, but her name had become radioactive. Whispers followed her everywhere. The woman who called the cops on the black nurse, the woman who tried to bury the truth and got buried herself. Asheville became a cautionary tale on the evening news, not just for South Carolina, for the whole country, a symbol of what happens when you ignore rot for too long, when you mistake silence for consent, when you think no one will ever hold you accountable. Meanwhile, Marsha Dean did not celebrate. She did not throw a party. She did not post triumphant selfies or demand apologies, because this was never about revenge. It was about survival, about making sure no one else had to carry the weight she carried alone that night in the pharmacy, about forcing a town to see itself not the version it wanted to believe, but the truth it had hidden under layers of politeness and pride. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. One afternoon, as Marsha walked out of the Silent Power Initiative's rented office space, she found a note taped to her car window. At first, her chest tightened. Old instincts, old fears. But when she peeled it free and read it, she felt something shift. It was handwritten, shaky but clear. Thank you for not giving up on this town. We do not deserve you, but we need you. Keep walking. No name, no signature, just those words. And for the first time in a long time, Marsha allowed herself to believe something she had not dared believe for months. Maybe change was possible. Maybe the fall of the old Ashville meant the beginning of something better. Not perfect, not easy, but better. That night, sitting with Arnold on their porch, Marsha showed him the note. He read it carefully, handed it back. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The crickets sang their slow song into the humid autumn night. Finally, Arnold said, voice low, "You changed more than you think." Marsha smiled, soft, sad, strong. "I didn't change anything," she said. "I just reminded them who they always could have been." Arnold reached over, took her hand, squeezed it gently, and together, they sat their two shadows under a wide southern sky, knowing the fall was not the end. It was only the clearing of the field. The hard work of planting could finally begin. Change does not happen overnight. Even after the fall of Asheville's leaders, the town itself moved slowly, like a wounded animal, unsure whether to run or to fight. Some stores put up new signs. All are welcome here. Some churches held forums on healing. Some people, the loudest critics from before, simply disappeared into the background, pretending they had never been part of the problem. But others stayed, and they watched. They watched Marsha Dean walk the streets with her hoodie and her head held high. They watched the Silent Power Initiative grow from a handful of students to dozens, then hundreds. They watched the old symbols crumble and something new take root in the spaces they had abandoned. Asheville was changing. Not cleanly, not easily, but changing. Marsha knew better than to trust surface changes. She had seen performative apologies before, seen systems bend just enough to avoid breaking, so she kept her eyes open. She watched who was really doing the work, the teachers rewriting lesson plans to include the real history, the shop owners hiring more black and brown employees, the teenagers starting their own voter drives. It was messy, it was slow, but it was real. And Marsha understood something that many of the town's leaders had forgotten. Real change is not a moment. It is a movement built on 1,000 small choices every day, every step forward. At the hospital, things were different too. The administration launched a full internal review after Marsha's experience made national news. New training programs rolled out. An anonymous reporting system was created for racial bias incidents. Leadership changed hands quietly. Marsha remained, by choice. Some wondered why she stayed in a place that had once humiliated her so publicly. But Marsha understood the power of presence. She stayed because leaving would have been easy, because staying forced the system to reckon with itself, because sometimes survival itself is a form of protest. One afternoon, after a long shift, Marsha sat in the hospital cafeteria with a young nurse named Keisha. Keisha was only a few months into her career. Bright-eyed but cautious, she looked at Marsha across the plastic table, her voice low. "How did you not break?" she asked. Marsha sipped her coffee slowly. "Thought about it. I did break," she said finally. "Plenty of times. Quietly, where no one could see." She set her cup down. "But breaking is not the same as giving up." Keisha frowned. "I do not get it." Marsha smiled gently. "You can break," she said. "You can cry. You can rage. You can sit in your car at night and wonder if any of it is worth it. But you still get up. You still show up. That is what they cannot take from you." Keisha nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking deep. Marsha reached across the table, squeezed her hand once. "You are stronger than you know," she said, "and you are not alone anymore." Meanwhile, the Silent Power Initiative continued to grow beyond anything Marsha had imagined. Local businesses offered scholarships, lawyers volunteered to teach workshops on civil rights, Students who once shuffled in nervously now spoke on panels and organized rallies. The energy was unstoppable. It was not built around Marsha. It was bigger than her now. And that was the point. It was never about creating followers. It was about creating leaders. Leaders who wore hoodies and braids and sneakers. Leaders who knew how to move through a world that would try to shrink them. Leaders who understood that silence could be a weapon or a shield, and they would know when to use both. At the one-year anniversary of the march, Asheville held its first ever Unity Day. Not a parade, not a political rally, a real gathering. Food trucks lined Main Street. Artists painted murals celebrating Black excellence and resilience. Marsha was asked to speak but declined. She knew the power of stepping back too, of letting new voices fill the spaces she had fought to create. Jayla gave the keynote address. She stood on the steps of City Hall, the same place Marsha had once stood, and spoke about dignity, about courage, about community. She ended her speech with a quote that Marsha recognized immediately because they had spoken it together. "We are not what they call us. We are what we build." The crowd roared. And in the middle of it, Marsha Dean stood quietly, hands in her hoodie pocket, watching a future she had fought for unfold. Not perfectly, not completely, but truly. And that was enough. That night, Asheville's sky lit up with fireworks. Families sprawled on blankets across the town square. Children laughed and chased each other under the bursts of color. And Marsha sat with Arnold on their familiar porch, the sound of celebration drifting to them on the breeze. Arnold looked at her, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You did good," he said. Marsha shook her head. "We did good," she thought, but she said nothing. Just leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of a town and a people that had decided to rise, not because they were invited, but because they belonged, and nothing, no amount of hate, fear, or humiliation could ever take that away again. Marsha Dean learned something important that year. You do not always see the moment the wall cracks. Sometimes it happens quietly. Sometimes it happens under pressure, little by little, until one day it just gives way. Asheville's wall had cracked, and there was no patching it back together. The schools were the first real sign. For years, Black students in Asheville had whispered about the double standards, how they were punished faster, suspended longer, watched more closely. Now, teachers underwent real training, not the kind you sit through for an hour with glazed eyes, but real conversations, led by people who understood the weight of history. New programs blossomed, mentorships, scholarships, clubs that celebrated Black literature, Black history, Black futures. Marsha was asked to speak at one of the first assemblies at Asheville High School. She wore her hoodie, walked up onto the stage, looked out over a sea of faces, brown, white, every shade in between, and felt something loosen in her chest. Maybe hope was not such a dangerous thing after all. At the Silent Power Initiative, growth came with new challenges. With more students came more needs, more money, more space, more protection from the backlash that never disappeared completely. Because even as Asheville tried to heal, there were still pockets of resistance, anonymous hate mail, threats scrawled in bathroom stalls, cowardice hiding behind internet screens. But Marsha understood now. Those voices were loud because they were losing. Fear always makes noise when it feels cornered. She taught her students that too. You are not responsible for their fear. She would say, you are only responsible for your light. And they believed her, because they had seen her walk through fire and never lose her way. One afternoon, while preparing lesson plans, Marsha received an email. It was from a woman she did not know, a former Asheville resident. She had grown up in the town but left years ago. Too tired of fighting to stay, she wrote, I watched from afar. I saw what you did. I never thought it could change. You made me believe again. Thank you. Marsha sat back in her chair, letting the words wash over her. She thought about all the people who had been forced to leave places like Asheville, who had been told with every glance, every whisper, that they did not belong. Maybe now, some of them might come back. Maybe now. The door was a little wider. Fall deepened. The leaves turned brittle gold and crimson, swirling through the streets like tiny revolutions. Marsha and Arnold spent their evenings on the porch, watching kids ride bikes down the street, hearing laughter where once there had been only tension. Ashville would never be perfect. Marsha knew that. There would always be work to do, always new battles to fight, but perfection had never been the goal. Presence was. Ownership was. The simple, stubborn act of existing fully, unapologetically, of claiming space where once you were only allowed to visit. One evening, as twilight softened the edges of the town, Arnold handed Marsha a small box. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this? Open it," he said. Inside was a silver necklace, a simple charm shaped like a hoodie, small, deliberate, a reminder. Marsha laughed a real, full laugh, the first in a long time. She fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the cool metal rest against her skin. "It suits you," Arnold said, his voice warm. Marsha touched the charm gently. "It suits all of us," she said, because it was never just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been judged by what they wore, everyone who had ever been dismissed before they spoke, everyone who had ever been forced to fight just to be seen. The news cycles moved on, as they always do. Ashville's scandal became yesterday's headline. Other stories took its place, but Marsha's story, their story, lived on in the people who remembered, in the students who refused to be silent, in the mothers who raised their babies to walk taller, in the fathers who taught their sons that strength was not in fists but in standing firm, in the old men on the porches who nodded quietly when Marsha walked by, tipping their hats in silent respect. Change did not come with parades. It came with small moments, stacked, one on top of another, until a new foundation stood where the old walls had crumbled, and Marsha Dean, once just a nurse in a hoodie, once just another invisible life, had helped lay that foundation, brick by brick, word by word, step by step. On the first cold night of the season, Marsha sat outside, hoodie pulled up against the chill. The stars overhead shimmered sharp and clear. She closed her eyes for a moment, listened to the heartbeat of the town, and she smiled, because the fall had come, the old had broken, and from the cracks, something better was already growing, slow, messy, beautiful, just like it should. The first lesson Marsha Dean taught her students was simple. You do not fight to be seen. You fight because you already are. She stood in front of the Silent Power Initiative's largest group yet, a sea of young faces, each one carrying a story, a hope, a weight they had not asked for but carried anyway. The classroom was cramped, hot with too many bodies packed into the old church basement, but nobody complained. They were here for something more important than comfort. They were here to learn how to live free. Marsha wore her hoodie that day, as she always did. It had become a symbol now, but for her, it was still just armor, soft, worn, unbreakable. She looked around the room, letting the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of it. Then she spoke. "How many of you," she said, "have ever been told to stay quiet?" Almost every hand went up, no hesitation. A few smiled bitterly, a few looked down at their shoes. Marsha nodded. "I was too," she said, "for a long time. But I learned something. Staying quiet does not keep you safe. It just keeps you small." The students leaned in. They knew this truth, had lived it even if they had never said it out loud. She walked slowly across the front of the room. No notes, no microphone, just her. "You do not have to shout to be powerful," she said. "You do not have to rage to be heard, but you do have to refuse to disappear. You have to take up space, own your story, wear your name like a crown, not a chain, She stopped, looked each student in the eye, held them there. You have the right to exist fully, without apology, without explanation. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise, they are lying to you. Simple, sharp, true. After the session ended, a group of students stayed behind. They asked questions. How do you handle it when people call you angry for speaking up? How do you stay calm when they try to humiliate you? Marsha listened carefully, then answered carefully. You choose when to speak. She said, and when you do, you speak from a place they cannot touch. Not anger, not fear, dignity. It is your shield, your silence, your words, your walk. They all tell a story. Make sure it is the story you want them to remember. The students wrote it down, not because it was homework, because it was survival, because it was hope. Outside, the autumn air had sharpened. The trees along the sidewalk were skeletal now, their leaves long surrendered. Marsha pulled her hoodie tighter and walked to her car, her boots crunching over fallen leaves. A small group of parents waited near the parking lot. They came to her one by one. Some offered quick hugs. Some pressed handwritten notes into her hands. Some simply looked at her, eyes shining with unspoken gratitude. She accepted it all quietly, graciously. Because she understood, it was not her they were thanking. It was what she had shown them was possible, that standing tall was not a dream. It was a choice. It was theirs to make too. Later that night, back on the porch, Arnold brought out a bottle of sweet tea and two glasses. They sat in silence, watching the stars blink awake in the velvet sky. You are building something real, he said after a while. Marsha smiled, slow and soft. I am not building it alone, she said. Arnold laughed under his breath. No, you are not. They clinked their glasses together, a small, quiet celebration of all the battles fought, all the ones still to come. Marsha thought about the lessons she had learned the hard way, that survival was not passive, it was active, it was a choice made every day, that dignity was not given, it was claimed, that fear was loud, but perseverance was louder, that true power was not about making others small, it was about refusing to shrink yourself. She thought about the day in the pharmacy, the cuffs, the humiliation, the cameras, and she realized something she had not fully understood until now. They had tried to make her a warning. Instead, she had become a beacon, and that was a lesson too, maybe the most important one. Marsha leaned back in her chair, hoodie snug around her shoulders, and smiled into the night. Because some lessons you learn by surviving, others you learn by standing. But the best ones, the ones that change the world, you learn by walking forward. Even when they try to stop you, especially then. The lessons Marsha Dean taught did not stay inside the walls of that church basement. They walked out into the streets of Ashville, into classrooms, into courtrooms, into board meetings and living rooms where hard conversations could no longer be ignored. Everywhere her students went, they carried her lessons stitched into their skin like invisible armor. Stand tall, speak true, refuse to disappear. The ripples spread wider than Marsha had ever dreamed. And soon, those ripples turned into waves. It started with a school board meeting. A group of high school students, many of them from the Silent Power Initiative, stood up and demanded changes to the outdated dress code that disproportionately punished Black students. They spoke clearly, calmly, unshaken. They brought statistics. They brought testimonies. They brought the undeniable truth. The board members, some of them used to intimidating teenagers into silence, found themselves on the defensive. The students refused to back down, and by the end of the night, the board voted to revise the policy. It was a small victory, but small victories have a way of teaching you that bigger ones are possible. Then came the election. For the first time in decades, Asheville had a real race for mayor. Two candidates stood for reform, for transparency, for dignity. They were young, they were Black, and they were fearless. Jayla was one of them. Marsha watched her campaign from a respectful distance, offering advice when asked, always encouraging but never leading for her. This was Jayla's fight now. Her time, her story. Marsha had simply helped clear the path. On election night, the town gathered in the square. Results came in slow, every update flashing across giant screens. And when Jayla's victory was announced, the cheers shook the very ground. Marsha stood in the crowd, hood up against the cold night air, smiling so wide her cheeks hurt, because she knew Asheville was not just changing, Asheville had changed. Still, change does not erase the past. It builds over it. It remembers. Some people in town still crossed the street when they saw Marsha coming, still locked their doors when a group of teenagers in hoodies walked by, but they were fewer now, their whispers drowned out by the louder, stronger voices of a new Asheville that refused to be ashamed of its own people. Progress is not the absence of hatred, it is the refusal to let hatred dictate the story. And Asheville had learned that lesson, thanks to Marsha, thanks to every quiet battle she had fought. One evening, months after Jayla's inauguration, Marsha attended a town event celebrating the community's progress. There were speeches, music, food trucks, and laughter. Children ran through the park, chasing each other under strings of lights. It was not perfect. There were still old tensions under the surface, still old wounds that would take years to fully heal. But it was good, real, earned. Marsha stood near the back, sipping sweet tea, watching. A little girl tugged on her hoodie. Marsha turned and knelt down. The girl could not have been more than 6. She wore a tiny hoodie of her own bright red, with glittery stars. "Are you the lady who made the march?" the girl asked shyly. Marsha smiled. "I was part of it." She said. The girl thought about that carefully, then nodded. "My mama says you are brave." She said. Marsha's throat tightened. She reached out and smoothed the girl's hair gently. "Your mama's brave too," she said. "And so are you." The little girl grinned wide, then darted off into the crowd. Marsha watched her go, feeling something deep and fierce bloom inside her chest. Hope, not the naive kind, the hard-earned kind, the kind you fight for, the kind you bleed for, the kind that lasts. Later that night, as the event wound down, Jayla found Marsha sitting on a bench, hoodie up, watching the stars blink awake. Jayla sat beside her, both of them silent for a long moment. Then Jayla spoke. "You know," she said softly, "they are going to write about this one day." Marsha chuckled low in her throat. "Maybe," Jayla shook her head. "No, they will. They will tell the story of how you taught us to walk taller, how you taught us that dignity is not something we earn from them, it is something we claim for ourselves." Marsha looked over at her. "You are the story now," she said simply. Jayla smiled. "But you showed us how to start." They sat there, side by side. 2 women, 2 generations, 1 fight, and all around them, the town pulsed with new life. The lesson was not in what Marsha said that night. It was in what she did not have to say. It was written in every light that glowed against the darkness. It was written in every child who ran free without fear. It was written in the simple, undeniable truth. Asheville had changed, and so had they. The final lesson Marsha Dean wanted to leave behind was the hardest one to teach. It was not about winning. It was about what you do after the crowd goes home, after the headlines fade, after the clapping stops. True power, she knew, was not in the moment of victory. It was in the quiet work that followed, the work no one celebrated, the work no one saw. She stayed late after silent power initiative meetings, helping students fill out college applications. She sat with mothers who needed help navigating housing discrimination complaints. She met with church leaders, business owners, teachers, anyone willing to be part of building the new Asheville brick by brick. And she did it without expecting a parade, without expecting her name carved into any plaques, because she understood now. Real change is not about having your name remembered. It is about building a world where others never have to fight the same battles you did. One Saturday morning, while cleaning the initiative's tiny office, Marsha found an old cardboard box tucked in the back of the storage closet. Inside were some of the first signs from the march. We stand with Marsha, dignity in every step. Hoodies are not a crime. She ran her fingers over the faded cardboard. The edges softened with time. The words still burned, still mattered. But she smiled as she gently stacked them back into the box, because they did not need those signs now. Not in the same way. Now, the message lived in the students themselves, in how they spoke, in how they showed up, in how they refused to shrink for anyone. That was the real victory, not a protest that made headlines, a generation that could walk free without asking for permission. A few weeks later, the initiative held a celebration, nothing fancy, just food, music, laughter, stories shared under the low hum of string lights. Jayla gave a short speech, full of fire and pride. The new mayor even came, standing in the back, clapping politely, understanding that tonight was not about politics, it was about persistence. Marsha tried to slip away early, as she often did. She was not comfortable being the center of attention, but Jayla caught her at the door. "You are not leaving yet," she said, laughing. "You have got to see something." Marsha followed her back inside, and there, in the center of the room, the students had built something, a mural, a giant collage of photographs, quotes, drawings all centered around a single image, a figure in a gray hoodie, standing tall against a sky full of stars, and underneath it, written in bold, black letters, "She walked so we could run." Marsha stood there, frozen, not from pride, from something deeper, from the weight of what it meant. She had not marched for glory. She had not stood her ground for applause. She had done it because she had no other choice, because dignity is not optional. It is oxygen. It is the soil from which everything else must grow. And somehow, without meaning to, she had handed that oxygen to others, taught them how to breathe freer, how to move louder, how to believe in their right to exist fully. Tears stung Marsha's eyes, surprising her. She blinked them away quickly. She did not want pity, did not want anyone to mistake her tears for weakness. They were not weakness. They were gratitude for the pain, for the lessons, for the road that had led her here. Jayla stepped beside her. "You gave us the map," she said simply. Marsha shook her head. "You drew your own?" she whispered, and she meant it. Because that was the final lesson. You do not free people by leading them. You free people by reminding them they can lead themselves. Later that night, walking home under a moonlit sky, Marsha felt lighter than she had in years. The hoodie wrapped around her shoulders like a second skin, her steps steady, her breath easy. She thought about all the stories she carried with her, the ones of struggle, the ones of hope, the ones of quiet triumphs no one else would ever see. They were not burdens anymore. They were gifts, proof that she had lived, fought, built, not perfectly, not without pain, but with purpose. And that was enough. That would always be enough. Marsha Dean knew the world would keep trying to silence people like her, trying to shrink them, trying to forget them. But she also knew something else now. You do not have to shout to be heard. You do not have to fight to exist. You simply have to walk forward, one step at a time, head high, hoodie up, heart open, because dignity is not given. It is walked into, and once you find it, no one can ever take it away again. The seasons turned again. Winter whispered through Ashville, dusting the sidewalks with frost, biting at the edges of windows. slowing the heartbeat of the town. But some things did not slow. They grew stronger, more certain, more permanent, and among them, Marsha Dean. She was not a headline anymore, not a symbol, not a controversy. She was something harder to define. She was a fact, a presence, a chapter in the town's story they could never erase. It was a cold Saturday morning when Marcia tied her hoodie strings tight against the wind and stepped out onto Main Street. The town square was setting up for the winter market. Booths lined the sidewalks, selling knitted scarves, homemade pies, secondhand books. Children ran laughing between the stalls. Marcia tucked her hands into her pockets and walked slowly. No rush, no destination, just being, existing fully in a place that had once tried to erase her. And as she walked, people noticed. A woman at a coffee stand gave her a shy wave. A young man selling candles nodded respectfully. Even a pair of police officers standing by the corner offered her a careful, genuine smile. It was not perfect. It would never be, but it was different now because Marcia had made it different. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to leave, refuse to shrink, refuse to vanish, and in doing so become undeniable. At the edge of the market, Marcia spotted Jayla organizing a group of students handing out flyers for the next Silent Power Initiative event. Jayla caught her eye and waved her over. "Come say hi," she called. Marcia smiled and made her way over. The students younger now, many of them new faces, brightened when they saw her. They surrounded her, peppering her with questions. How do you stay strong? What do you do when people still doubt you? How do you know if you're making a difference? Marcia listened, patient, steady. Then she said, "You do not measure your impact by their applause. You measure it by who you help stand taller after you." The students nodded, soaking it in. Jayla grinned. "You sure you do not want to run for office someday?" she teased. Marcia laughed, the sound low and easy. "No," she said. "My place is here, walking, teaching, building," and they understood because leadership was not always a podium. Sometimes it was a presence. Sometimes it was a hoodie in a crowd, a silent reminder that survival itself was a kind of victory. After chatting with the students, Marcia wandered farther down the street, past the bookstore where once someone had followed her around suspiciously, past the pharmacy under new ownership, with a new manager who smiled warmly and waved her in every time she passed. Ashville had cracks. Still, it always would. But through those cracks, something better was growing, something harder to kill, something rooted in truth. Marcia knew she had not done it alone. She had simply been one of the first to refuse to look away, to refuse to lower her eyes, to refuse to apologize for existing. Later, as the sun sank low and the town glowed gold in the winter dusk, Marcia found herself near the old oak tree at the center of the square. It had been there for longer than the town itself, twisted and battered by storms and seasons, still standing, still growing. Marcia walked to it, brushed her fingers lightly over the rough bark. She thought about all the hands that must have touched it before hers, all the people who had stood under its branches, some hoping, some hiding, some fighting, and she smiled, because survival was not just enduring. It was leaving roots behind for others to find. It was making sure they knew when the world tried to erase them that someone had stood here before, someone who had refused to be moved, someone who had walked on. The cold deepened. Lights flickered on across the square. Families packed up their market stalls, children squealing as they chased each other to warm cars. Marcia pulled her hoodie tighter around her and turned toward home, her steps steady, her heart steady. No fanfare, no cameras, just a woman walking through her town, the same town that had once tried to break her, now learning step by step, heart by heart, how to rebuild itself. Because of her, because of what she refused to surrender, because of every silent, steady, Stubborn step. The hoodie walked on, and nothing, not hatred, not humiliation, not fear could ever stop it again. The road home was quiet. Ashville's streets wound through neighborhoods where old oak trees stood guard over small houses, their bare branches reaching up to a sky fading from gold to deep indigo. Marsha Dean walked slowly, not because she was tired, because she wanted to feel it. Every step, every crack in the sidewalk, every breath of winter air. This was her town, her streets, her story, and she would not rush it. As she passed the neighborhood park, Marcia spotted a few teenagers gathered around a bench, laughing, teasing each other, phones glowing blue in the dark. They wore hoodies too, different colors, different shapes, but the same quiet defiance, the same silent declaration. We are here. We belong. We do not need your permission. Marcia smiled softly. She remembered a time not so long ago when wearing a hoodie in Asheville meant suspicion, meant risk. Now it meant pride. It meant survival stitched into cotton and thread. It meant walking tall when the world wanted you to shrink. At the corner near her street, she paused. There was a new mural there, painted on the side of an old laundromat that had once banned black teenagers from gathering outside. The mural showed a girl in a hoodie, standing on a road that stretched into a sunrise, and above her, in broad strokes of white paint, the words, "Your story is not a threat. It is a beginning." Marcia reached out and traced the edge of the painted hoodie with her fingertips. It was not about her. It never had been. It was about all of them, the ones who had walked before, the ones who were walking now, the ones still to come. At home, Arnold was already on the porch waiting, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in the cold. He stood when he saw her, concern flickering briefly across his face. "Everything all right?" he asked. Marcia nodded. More than all right. Alive, changing, growing. She climbed the steps, took the mug from him, and they sat together in the quiet, the sky above them stitched with stars. For a while, neither spoke. They just listened to the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of a town settling into itself. Arnold finally broke the silence. "You think it will last?" he asked. Marcia did not answer right away. She took a slow sip of coffee, feeling its warmth bloom through her chest. Then she said, "Nothing good ever comes easy, but once you know it is possible, you cannot unknow it." Arnold nodded. He understood. The real victory was not the fall of corrupt officials. It was not the newspaper headlines. It was in the new habits growing in Asheville's bones. It was in the children who no longer flinched when they walked into a store. It was in the teenagers laughing on park benches without fear. It was in every quiet, stubborn refusal to go back to the way things were. Marcia leaned her head against Arnold's shoulder, letting herself rest for a moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They always did. But tonight she could breathe. Tonight she could claim a small, precious piece of peace, because she knew now, truly knew, that no matter what storms came, she would stand, that others would stand too, and that the story would walk forward with or without permission, because dignity once claimed does not retreat, it does not shrink, it does not apologize. It walks, one step at a time, one breath at a time, one unbreakable heartbeat at a time. Somewhere in town, a train rumbled softly across distant tracks. A dog barked twice and fell silent, and Marsha Dean closed her eyes, the weight of her hoodie settling around her like a blessing, not a burden, never again a burden. The hoodie walked on, and through it, so did hope, so did history, so did a new future, stitched from the stubborn, beautiful refusal to ever be small again. Tomorrow, she would wake up early. She would teach her students. She would walk her streets. She would continue building something that would outlast even memory. But for now, she simply sat, A woman in a hoodie under a sky full of stars, silent, steady, free, and the town, whether it knew it or not, revolved just a little differently because of her, because dignity is a gravity all its own, because truth, once spoken, once lived, bends the world around it. Because once a hoodie walks free, it never walks alone again. Morning came soft and cold. Marsha Dean stood at her kitchen sink, mug in hand, watching the first pale light spill across the yard. The world looked different in the morning, fresh, possible. She had always loved mornings. Not because they promised easy days, she knew better than to expect that, but because every morning meant another chance to walk forward, another chance to leave footprints where others could follow. After breakfast, she pulled on her hoodie, slipping into it the way some people slip into armor, not to hide, to declare. Arnold kissed her forehead on the way out the door, his own path full of meetings and phone calls, still fighting battles too quiet for headlines. Marsha locked the door behind her. Hoodie up, heart steady, the streets were waking up around her, vendors setting up their stalls for another market day, mothers walking children to daycare bundled tight against the cold. Workers in neon vests repairing potholes from the last hard freeze. Ashville moved differently now. It breathed differently. It was not perfect. There were still stares sometimes, still old fears that clung to certain corners like cobwebs. But those fears had learned to flinch when Marsha Dean walked by, because she carried something now, a history, a truth, a weight too large to be ignored. At the Silent Power Initiative office, the students gathered early. Marsha pushed open the door and was greeted by a chorus of mourning. Miss Dean, she smiled, unzipping her hoodie but keeping it on. The room buzzed with energy plans for the next community project. Discussions about volunteering at the food pantry, excitement about college acceptance letters trickling in. They were building, they were leading, and Marsha was exactly where she needed to be in the background. Lifting them up without blocking the light, she moved between the tables, checking on each student, asking about their projects, offering quiet encouragement. At one corner table, a boy named Terrence, a quiet kid with a brilliant mind for numbers, caught her hand as she passed. Miss Dean, he said, voice shy but certain. When I grow up, I want to do what you do. Marsha knelt down to his level. You already are, she said. Terrence grinned wide, cheeks dimpling. Marsha ruffled his hair gently before moving on, heart full, because this was what walking on meant, not just surviving, planting seeds, tending gardens she might never see bloom, and trusting deeply that bloom they would. Later that afternoon, Marsha attended a panel discussion at the new community center. The mayor was there, Jayla too, and rows of Asheville residents, black, white, brown, young, old, filled the folding chairs. The panel discussed justice, equity, belonging. Marsha sat in the back. No need to be on stage. Her work was already speaking. Her students sat in the front rows, asking sharp questions, proposing real solutions. They spoke about living without apology. They spoke about systems built wrong and how to rebuild them. And every word, every idea was a brick laid on the foundation Marsha had helped build. Her chest ached with a pride so fierce it almost hurt, not for herself, for them, for the world they were shaping with every breath. After the panel ended, people milled about, sipping lukewarm coffee, exchanging cards and promises to stay in touch. Marsha started to slip out quietly, but an older woman caught her at the door. She was white, maybe in her 70s, wearing a knitted scarf and thick glasses. She reached out, touched Marsha's arm lightly. You do not know me, she said, voice shaking slightly. But I wanted to thank you. For what? Marsha asked gently. The woman smiled, eyes misty. For reminding us that change is possible, she said, for reminding us that silence is not the answer anymore. Marsha covered the woman's hand with her own for a moment, squeezed, said nothing, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, I am still here. And she was still standing, still walking, still refusing to vanish. That evening, Marcia and Arnold took a slow walk around their block. The sky above them bruised with the colors of sunset. The wind tugged at Marcia's hoodie, flaring it out behind her like a banner. Arnold tucked his hand into hers. You ever think about leaving? He asked after a long stretch of silence. Marcia shook her head slowly. I thought about it. She said, plenty of times. But then I remembered the point is not just to survive, it is to belong. And you cannot belong to a place if you run every time it tries to push you out. Arnold squeezed her hand tighter. You taught them that, he said. Marcia smiled, small and sure. I reminded them. She corrected. They had it in them the whole time. They walked on, slow and steady, the street lights blinking awake above their heads. No parade, no grand finale, just the steady, stubborn beat of dignity carving itself into the bones of a town that would never be the same again. Because the hoodie walked on, and it always would. Marsha Dean's journey was never about shouting the loudest. It was about standing the longest. It was about showing a town and the world that dignity does not come with permission. It comes from within, through every silent stare, through every heavy step, through every cold morning where quitting would have been easier. Marsha walked on. Her hoodie, once a target, became a symbol, a quiet flag waving against the storms, proof that survival is not weakness, it is power. Proof that persistence, even in silence, can remake the world. Ashville changed, not because someone handed it change, but because someone demanded it by refusing to disappear. This is not just Marsha's story, it is all of ours. It is every time you were told to stay small and chose instead to stand tall. Every time the world doubted you and you kept walking anyway. If this story moved you, if it made you remember your own silent battles, if it made you proud to keep walking too, subscribe to Silent Power Stories. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity walks louder than hate. Turn on the bell so you never miss the next journey we walk together. Your voice matters. Your walk matters. Your story matters. Keep walking. Keep standing. Keep building. Silent. Powerful. Unstoppable.